Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. It began with the dead-eyed phantoms that wandered the edge of the village. No one else could see them. Not the farmers, not the children, not even the priest who lived by prayer and incense. Only Silas Vandro, a stonemason's apprentice with nothing remarkable to his name, saw them shuffling between the trees, draped in fog and silence. They beckoned with fingers like broken branches, and their faces shifted like water over glass, never the same shape twice. He had tried ignoring them for weeks, convincing himself they were dreams that hadn't faded with sleep, but they returned, every dusk, without fail, waiting just past the fence, always just outside the reach of firelight. He told no one. He had tried once with his mother, but she only smiled with a tired kindness and pressed a hand to his forehead. Too much sun, Silas. Rest. It'll pass. It hadn't. The phantoms called him, and on the eve of the harvest festival, when the moon was a pale disk behind streaks of cold gray, he followed. The forest beyond the village had no name, at least none spoken aloud. Old stories called it cursed, or haunted, or sacred, depending on who told them and how drunk they were at the time. Silas had never gone more than 10 steps into it. Trees grew too tightly there, knotted and twisted, and the ground dipped sharply as if trying to swallow intruder. But the phantoms slipped through like wind, gliding between trunks as if they were made of the same wood and fog. Silas's boots sank into loam and rotting leaves as he followed. They didn't look back, they didn't speak, but somehow he knew where to go. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. Even the cicadas fell silent. Shadows lengthened despite no change in the moonlight, and a bitter wind teased the back of his neck. At some point, the path disappeared. He didn't care, his legs moved on their own. The phantoms grew brighter, not darker, as they advanced. Their glow was not light, exactly, but presence, like staring into something older than language. Then the forest ended. There was no transition. One step was pine needles and root. The next was soft grass under a starless sky. The air here tasted different, sharper, colder, filled with a pressure that made his teeth ache. He turned to look behind him. There was nothing. No trees, no phantoms, no path, only endless dark hills under a sky that seemed too vast, too heavy. Panic didn't come. That was strange. His heart beat normally. His breathing didn't hitch. Something in him had already accepted that this place, wherever it was, had rules of its own. Fear would not serve him here. A voice rang out across the field, not a whisper, not the phantoms. This voice was loud, confident, and annoyed. "Don't step there, you damned idiot." Silas jerked to his right just in time. A glyph, a radiant swirl of red and gold, flared to life beneath the grass where his foot had been. Energy cracked like a whip across the ground, searing a burn into the soil. Smoke drifted upward. From behind a ridge, a figure approached, cursing under his breath. He wore a heavy coat lined with small metallic plates, and a pendant around his neck glowed softly with moving runes. His hair was the color of wet ash, and his expression screamed noble-born inconvenience. "You almost tripped a rune net," the man said. "What kind of backwater fool walks into a binding field without checking the ground?" Silas blinked. "You're from the edge, aren't you?" the man continued, waving his hand dismissively. "Only edgers still wear linen belt. Do you even know what a latchstone is?" "Gods preserve me, this is the third one today." Silas opened his mouth again, but the man raised a hand and snapped his fingers. The glow beneath the grass dimmed, and the runes sank into the earth. "Well, lucky for you, I'm feeling generous," he said, turning away. "Come on, before another cast surge opens. The flux is unstable tonight." He started walking. After a moment, Silas followed. The man led him across rolling hills and shallow streams that sparkled with strange hues, violet, amber green, as if the water held trapped suns. Strange metal spires jutted from the ground at odd angles, etched with script that pulsed softly. At one point they passed a tree with leaves shaped like knives, fluttering soundlessly. Silas said nothing. He committed every detail to memory. After a half hour, buildings rose on the horizon. They weren't like his village's squat houses or wooden barns. These were smooth structures of stone and brass, with curved rooftops and floating lanterns that bobbed through the air like fireflies. The city shimmered under starlight that wasn't natural, as if the heavens had been painted by a madman with too many colors and not enough restraint. The man, still grumbling, led him past an outer gate, through a wide plaza filled with archways and sigil-stitched banners. People passed them, dressed in robes, armor, or layered silks. Most ignored Silas. A few stared. The man stopped in front of a tall, angular building that pulsed with quiet power. "You're lucky I'm bored. This is the Academy of the Third Meridian." They take in anomalies like you. Tell them Hellion sent you." He turned to leave. "Wait," Celeste said, finding his voice again. "What is this place?" Hellion paused, then looked over his shoulder with a sigh. "You're not from this world, are you?" Celeste shook his head. Hellion's gaze lingered a moment, then softened, just barely. "Well, that explains the linen." He walked away without another word. The Academy of the Third Meridian did not resemble any school Celeste had imagined. There were no classrooms in the traditional sense, only towers with spiraling interiors, study halls where the floor rearranged itself to match the lesson, and courtyards where students tested spells against rune-inscribed barriers. Tutors appeared as needed, not bound to any schedule. Magic suffused everything, not just in utility, but in philosophy. The faculty called Celeste an extern, a rare type of arrival. There were whispers that he'd come from a fold, or a cracked corridor, or some lesser realm touched by flux. None agreed on what that meant. They tested him, gently at first, then with awe. Nothing they gave him functioned the way it should. Celeste's hovered and upped. Runes glowed backwards. Enchantments unraveled or became entirely new things when channeled through him. They recorded it all and gave him books filled with theories he didn't understand. No one taught him how to control it. The Academy did not specialize in that. They believed in cultivation through immersion. "The we will teach you if you survive it," one scholar had said, smiling as if that were wisdom instead of madness. And so Celeste wandered. He found comfort in the library, a cavernous sprawl of shelves and floating platforms. It was there that he met Vina Myrna. She was already seated at a table filled with glowing parchments and half-complete diagrams. Her ink-stained gloves tapped out a rhythm, as she frowned over a binding circle. When Celeste approached, curious about the unusual arrangement of her runes, she looked up and gave him a flat stare. "Do not speak," she said, "unless you can explain how recursive loops affect transfer glyphs during mana convergence." Celeste blinked. "I can't." "Then sit." "Quiet." He did. They didn't speak for nearly an hour. Then abruptly, she shoved a scroll toward him. "Try that. Your flux is strange. I want to see how it breaks this." He obeyed. The moment his fingers brushed the scroll, the runes reoriented themselves into an entirely new configuration. Vina's eyes lit up. "You really are an extern." She became his closest companion after that. Not out of kindness, she had little of it, but curiosity. Vina was a prodigy among runecasters, already outperforming senior students. Her interest in Celeste was clinical at first. She wanted to chart the nature of his interference with established patterns, but over time, her gruff demeanor softened. She began to bring him tea during long sessions, left notes on his desk, argued with anyone who questioned his presence. Hellion returned often, usually to challenge Celeste to mock duels or scold him for poor posture. He never explained why he cared, but he pushed Celeste relentlessly. Despite his noble bearing, Hellion knew how to really fight with both blade and spell. He mocked Celeste's reliance on raw flux, insisting that brute power without technique was a path to self-destruction. "You think because your magic is different, it's better," he said once after knocking Celeste to the ground with a burst of compressed light. "It's like swinging a sword made of fire. Pretty, but useless unless you know where to cut." Celeste hated him, then respected him, then hated him again. The three of them became an odd trio. Vina the calculating genius, Hellion the sardonic warrior scholar, and Celeste the anomaly. No one understood. They didn't always get along. But the Academy, with all its shifting walls and cryptic masters, became their temporary home. It didn't last. One night, as Celeste studied a tome of dimensional bindings, the walls of the library groaned. Not creaked, groaned, like a creature exhaling. A ripple spread through the room, making scrolls flutter and ink freeze in midair. Vina looked up. "Did you feel that?" Celeste nodded slowly. The air smelled of copper. Hellion burst in moments later, not bothering with subtlety. A tier just opened near the lower grounds, not a training simulation. Real. They ran. Others were already gathered, a mix of students and tutors forming hasty wards and containment ring. The air around the breach shimmered violently, a twisting spiral of darkness fringed by shards of floating light. Something was trying to come through. Celeste stepped forward without thinking. "Celeste," Vina hissed. "What are you?" He raised a hand. The flux answered, not like before. This time the energy poured into him. Not raw but shaped like it recognized him. The spiral slowed, the light condensed. Patterns etched themselves into the stone at his feet. The tear sealed with a sigh that only he heard. Silence. Dozens stared. No one spoke for a long time. Then Hellion muttered, "What the hell are you?" Celeste didn't answer. He didn't know yet, but he intended to find out. The days following the breach blurred together, but not in the way idle days do. Every hour carried weight. Students murmured in passing, eyes lingering on Celis longer than before. Tutors asked fewer questions and gave more orders. The head invigilator, an ancient man whose eyes had long since turned milky with embedded glyph threads, called him singular. The term wasn't explained. It didn't have to be. The moment Celis had sealed the breach, the academy had changed its posture toward him. No longer a curiosity. Now, a possible threat, or an answer to one. Celis didn't care for either. He woke earlier, trained harder, asked sharper questions of the text Vina gave him. She noticed. "You're turning into a scholar," she said over an alchemical breakfast of prism fruit and iron bread. "It's disgusting," he smirked, exhausted. "You're just mad I corrected your sigil map yesterday." "You didn't correct it, you mangled it with chaotic intuition." Shalian, arriving late and armed with 2 satchels of dueling gear, dropped into his chair. "He corrected it. You just don't like that his madness works." Vina rolled her eyes and stabbed a prism fruit slice like it had personally offended her. "Madness isn't a system. Eventually he's going to collapse the weave around himself. Or fix it." Shalian countered. "You're betting on entropy." "I'm betting on pattern." Shalis half listened. The pressure hadn't left him since the breach. The power that surged into him hadn't faded. It had just gone quiet, waiting, observing, not threatening, but not idle. By week's end, 3 more breaches appeared across the region. One was in a merchant district. Another along the river, where hex steel barges ferried alchemic goods. The third had torn open within a restricted archive chamber, killing 2 senior mages before containment could be arranged. None were natural, according to the Grand Leximancer. "They are cut lines," he said, presenting a flickering projection to the Academy's core council. "Deliberate, precise. Someone is severing the border fabric." Shalis wasn't invited to the meeting. He listened from a scry node Vina had illegally tapped into. Shalian brought the fruit wine. "They think it's coming from the wound," she whispered, eyes narrow, "that place between realm." "The rift cluster?" Shalis asked. "Where they test dimensional theories." "No, that's the fray. The wound is older, forbidden. They sealed it 5 cycles ago. If it's reactivating, something's pushing from the other side." Celis stared into the projection of a jagged tear, spiraling inward like a broken eye. He remembered the phantoms. The way they had led him, the way they disappeared after he arrived. Not malicious, but purposeful. "You think someone opened a path through the wound," "And I fell through, or you were pushed," Shalian murmured. The thought settled into Celis like a buried hook. He didn't sleep that night. Training changed. Where before, he had sparred against fellow students and floating constructs, now he faced more lethal opponents. Automated husks powered by ancient manacores, relics from past wars. He learned to direct his flux, not in controlled spells, but in reactive bursts. It refused traditional form. No binding circle could hold it, but it flowed like instinct. Vina created devices to read its patterns, etching crystal-threaded gauntlets for him. "These don't control anything," she warned. "They just listen. Maybe we'll learn something if you don't explode." Halion, meanwhile, brought him into skirmish drills with third-year combatants. "You need rhythm," he barked between blows. "A mage who stutters gets gutted." Salas adapted quickly. Too quickly, the others noted. His movements had become fluid, seamless, almost too perfect for someone untrained. His reflexes no longer surprised him. They obeyed him. During one session, a blade of light nearly took his arm. Without thinking, his body bent backwards in an impossible curve, and the blade turned to salt in midair. Even Vina flinched. "That's not flux," she said quietly. "That's something else." The gauntlets agreed. The crystal mesh turned black from the strain. "I didn't mean to do that," Salas muttered. "Then who did?" Halion asked. They were summoned to the East Observatory 2 days later. High stone towers surrounded the building, each inscribed with words that shimmered even during daylight. The guard at the door, a massive woman wearing soulbound armor, didn't speak. She simply stepped aside. Inside, 5 masters sat behind an arc of crystal runes, each one older than any of them had seen before. Not old by age, but by knowledge, burdened by it. They didn't introduce themselves. "You've breached the cycle," said one, her voice rough as gravel over steel. "Intended or not, your presence here disrupts the spiral of this world." Salas said nothing. "You sealed a breach. You bent forbidden energies to will. And more importantly," she paused, "you were not consumed." Vina tensed. Halion rested a hand on the hilt of a sword he had not brought into the room. "Someone sent you through a fractured gate," another said. "We've scribed your arrival point. There are traces of something else embedded. Residual direction. Intent." "So someone pushed him here," Halion said. "What's new?" "Not pushed," the master corrected. "Hunted, then banished. Your flux is a wound stitch, Salas Vandril. You close what others open. That is rare. That is dangerous." That is necessary. Silas finally spoke. You want to use me? No, the gravel-voiced one replied. We want to understand you, then we want to decide whether to preserve or destroy you. Silence thickened. We believe the next breach will not be local, she added. It will be at the threshold of lanterns. Vina hissed. That's borderland, protected. That's halfway to the Hollow Ranges. Exactly, the master said. Halion stepped forward. You're sending him into the field. We are giving him a chance, she corrected, to survive by purpose. He will not go alone. The two of you will accompany him. None of them spoke on the way out. The threshold of lanterns wasn't what Silas expected. It wasn't a fortress or tower. It was a forest, deep, vast, and lit by hundreds of floating golden flames that hovered eternally just above the tree canopy. They didn't flicker or move. They watched. The three of them traveled with a guide named Saren, a woman with jade-threaded tattoos and a long-range ether bow. She spoke rarely, but when she did, it carried the kind of weight that came from years outside the safety of walls. Nothing comes through here by accident, she said as they reached the edge. If there's a breach, it'll be undercover. They entered the woods in silence. The lanterns overhead did not dim, but the ground felt inverted, like walking across something's skin rather than soil. Silas's flux stirred uneasily. Vina tightened the bands around her wrist, rune plates reacting to subtle threats. You feel that, Halion murmured. Like stepping into a memory, Silas answered. They found the breach 3 days later. Or rather, it found them. It opened like a mouth wide, wet, humming with ancient tension. But unlike the others, this one didn't pulse. It breathed. Something within shifted. No ceiling, Saren said immediately. We observe. Nothing more. But Silas stepped forward anyway. The air shimmered. His hands stretched out. He expected heat, pain, resistance. Instead, the breach rippled like silk under his palm. A shape moved within tall, lean humanoid. Then a whisper. Not words. Not thought. Something else. Something that slid under language and curled around meaning. Silas staggered back. What did you hear? Vina asked, her eyes wide. He looked past them, toward the forest. The lanterns had gone dark. We need to leave, he said. Saren didn't argue. She fired an arrow through the breach. The head vanished. No sound, no resistance. They ran. Not fast enough. The breach didn't seal. It followed. Not like a creature chasing, but like a storm enveloping. The air twisted behind them, turning cold and wrong. Trees shriveled. The grass hissed. Silas's flux surged, reacting violently. Then the thing stepped through. It was shaped like a man, but its skin was made of mirrored fragments, each one showing a different sky. Its eyes were empty sockets bleeding light. No face, no mouth. Vina screamed something. A wall of force burst outward, throwing the creature into a tree. It didn't flinch, just stood. Then, it raised a hand. Silas moved. He didn't know what spell he cast, if any, but the ground buckled and dragged the creature into a pit of hardened light. His body screamed from the exertion. Halion closed the gap and slashed. The sword passed through its chest like mist. It turned to look at him. The mirrored pieces rippled. Then, it spoke. Silas Vandrel. The voice wasn't loud, it was precise. Familiar. It was his own voice. The light fractured. The pit failed. The creature vanished. So did the breach. For a long time, none of them moved. Was that? Vina started, but didn't finish. A reflection, Sauron said, jaw clenched. No, worse. An echo. Silas said nothing. He watched the space where the breach had been, listening for something else. There was only silence. But within it he felt a tether, faint, distant and unbroken. It hadn't been trying to kill him. It had been calling him home. They returned to the academy with mud still on their boots and ash in their breath. Sales didn't speak during the long ride, nor did Vina. Halion made a half-hearted attempt at a joke. Something about mirrored monstrosities being easier to fight with polite introductions, but no one laughed. Not even him. The carriage rolled through the gates as the sky bled into dusk, the towers casting longer shadows than they should have. Guards at the gates stared a little too long. Something in them knew something had changed. The masters didn't summon them immediately. That was strange. Normally a report like theirs would be dragged into the central council within the hour, but days passed. 2. Then 3. Still nothing. Seo spent those days walking the edge of the library's upper tier, a place few students visited. From there he could see the spires of the city, the strange flickering between dimensions near the skyline that only his eyes caught. At times, when he stared too long, he saw echoes, ghost images of figures moving just out of phase, like reflections in broken glass. He no longer feared them. They watched him the way animals watched a predator they didn't understand. Vina busied herself in the research annex, poring over sealed texts, half of which she wasn't allowed to read. She did anyway. Every time Salis entered the room, she'd glance at him, then look away before muttering something about pattern theory or energy reformation. She didn't ask about what he'd felt when the echo said his name. She didn't have to. She knew. Halion, in contrast, threw himself into duels. He challenged instructors, third-year duelists, even one of the statue sentinels bound by pact runes. He lost some, won more, and walked away from each fight with new scars. But Salis could see it. The distraction. He wasn't trying to improve. He was trying to forget. Finally, the summons came. Not from the masters, but from a stranger who wore no crest, no sigils, no marks of rank. The man appeared in the great hall just after sunset. His face plain, his clothes gray, his presence somehow too large for the space he occupied. He said only one thing. Come. They followed without argument. He led them into the lower halls beneath the academy, a place few tread willingly. It was called the Folded Halls, though no one truly understood why. The air there felt older, stone-breathed. Lights hovered in silence, not by magic, but as if they had always been. The walls whispered, not in sound but in memory. Salis could feel his own thoughts circling back on themselves the longer they walked. Eventually the man stopped at a narrow arch of silverstone, carved with ancient glyphs. She waits. Then he vanished, not walked away, not stepped into another passage, simply ceased. Halion cursed. Of course, Vina muttered. Why does no one ever give us straight paths? Salis stepped through. The chamber beyond was circular, domed, lit by a single hovering prism that spun in place like a slow star. Beneath it stood a woman. She wore no robes, only a simple tunic, and bracers inscribed with runes Salis couldn't place. Her hair was white, not from age but by choice. Her eyes weren't human. They shimmered with shifting constellations, as if something behind her gaze stared out. I am Lusathe, she said, voice low but resonant. I am the watcher of the undrawn map. You were not meant to cross. Salis frowned. And yet I did. Yes, she replied, because something on this side pulled harder than what held you there. Halion stepped forward. What is he, us? Lusathe looked at him. A wound. A thread. A paradox born from a dying realm, and sewn into a living one. His presence here is the echo of something that refused to remain dead. That's not an answer, Vina said sharply. No, Lusathe said. It's a beginning. She turned to Salis. You are not native. That much is known. But the mirror being that emerged from the breach, it used your voice. Not because it copied you, because it was you. Or rather, one potential of you. This world exists within a cluster of possibility. Most collapse. Some survive. Yours resists collapse. Salis felt a cold weight settle behind his ribs. You mean there are other versions of me? No, Lusathe said. I mean the thing that stepped through wasn't separate. It was your reflection through a bent corridor of time and intention. It survived the collapse of its reality by tying itself to yours. You were its anchor. And if it finds you again, it will replace you. Replace, Halion echoed. Not in body, she said. In pattern, in truth. You will become it and it will become real. Lusathe stepped in. So, we kill it. Lusathe shook her head. You can't. Not yet. You're not strong enough. And the breach is no longer open. But you can weaken the anchor. Break the links it still uses. Salis asked. She reached into the air and pulled. A shimmer appeared, and a scroll formed out of nothing. Inscribed with bleeding ink, she handed it to him. These are sites where your tether still leaks energy. Close them. Not with power, with choice. You must sever the conditions that allow the echo to feed. He took the scroll. The paper felt warm, like skin. Lusathe, why help us? Lusathe's eyes dimmed slightly. Because if he wins, the pattern collapses, and this world with it. They left the chamber with more questions than answers. Salis didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window of the high dorm tower, scroll in hand, watching the stars spin far too fast. The scroll listed 5 sites. None near, all difficult. The first was called the Mirror Hollow. They left at dawn. No farewell, no ceremony. The academy did not send them off. Perhaps it couldn't. The scroll marked their journey, and the scroll did not tolerate delay. The Mirror Hollow lay beyond the Shatter Range, a jagged sprawl of half-formed mountains that echoed with the remnants of forgotten wars. They traveled on foot. Airships could not pass through the magnetic fields that pulsed irregularly across the range. Saren returned to guide them again. She asked no questions. Her silence was welcome. The days passed in rough terrain, punctuated by oddities. A stone path that reversed direction when no one looked. A cave where gravity pointed sideways. A sky that changed colors according to one's thoughts. Silas grew used to the strange. His flux did not rebel. It flowed more smoothly here, like the world itself understood his rhythm. On the 6th night, they camped near a spring that whispered. Not in voices but in music. Each drop made sound. Together they made song. Vana recorded some of it onto a sigil type. Halion sharpened his blade. Silas stared into the fire, fingers tracing the edges of the scroll. You're changing, Vana said suddenly. He looked up. What do you mean? Not physically, not magically, something in the way you move, think, even your voice. Halion added, you speak less, but your silence is louder. Salis said nothing. The next day, they reached Mirror Hollow. It wasn't a cave as they expected. It was a lake, flat, perfect, undisturbed by wind. Trees ringed it, each one reflected flawlessly below. The scroll vibrated. Salis stepped to the shore. His reflection did not match him. It stood differently. Its eyes held no light. That's it, Vina said. Halion gripped his sword. What now? Salis stepped into the water. It should have been cold. It wasn't. It felt like memory. His reflection didn't move. Then it smiled. The world shifted. He stood in a space that had no sky, no floor, only endless reflections. Thousands of him. Some older, some younger, some roped, some burned. They all stared at him. Then one stepped forward. You're late, it said. Salis opened his mouth, but the other held up a hand. Doesn't matter. You came. That's what matters. Now fight. It attacked. There was no spell, no chant, just force. Pure will turned into impact. Salis countered instinctively, pulling on flux without shaping it. The blow passed through him and slammed into a mirror behind, which shattered into starlight. The other Salis moved again, faster now, warping space with each step. Salis dodged, ducked, struck. Their movements mirrored at first, then diverged. I'm what you become, the echo said. If you keep choosing power. I didn't choose power, Salis growled. I chose survival. Same thing. They clashed again. This time, Salis struck true. The echo stumbled, led something that shimmered like oil. It laughed. You can't kill me, I'm your future. To end me is to end your own path. Then I'll change the path, Salis snapped. And he did. He let go. Instead of fighting, he reached, not to attack, but to merge. He pulled the echo into himself. The impact cracked reality. The hollow screamed. When he woke, he was lying beside the lake. The scroll had burned to ash. Vina leaned over him, eyes wide. Helion stood, sword half raised. What happened? She asked. Salis sat up slowly. I broke one of the links. Helion offered a hand. 4 to go. He took it. They left Mirror Hollow in silence. The path was still long, the dangers growing, the world shifting. But now, Salis no longer felt like a visitor. He belonged to this world, and it, for better or worse, belonged to him. The second location on the scroll was named the Weeping Forge. No map bore its name. No scholars at the academy would speak of it directly. And when Vina inquired at the Department of Metallurgic Realities, she received only a single sentence from the iron-masked archivist. That which weeps remembers its purpose. The phrase burned itself into the request slip, searing through the parchment like acid. That was the only answer they were given. Still, the scroll had listed it, and the scroll had never been wrong. Saren guided them, as far as the edge of the singed barrens, where a reddish earth cracked and fumed with sulfur and forgotten enchantments. Beyond that, the path broke into jagged wastes. Saren stopped beneath the skeleton of a wind-hollowed ark. Her bow hung loose at her side, her face unreadable. This is where I stop. You've brought us through worse, Helion said, casting a glance over the dry expanse ahead. Nothing I've crossed remembers my name, she replied flatly. The forge up. Before they could question her further, she turned and disappeared into the mist that clung to the ridge. That was how she always left, without farewell, without pause. They went on alone. For a day and a half, they walked through smoke and silence. The sky remained dull, as though the clouds had long since lost interest in light. The land sloped downward in twisted plateaus, each lower than the last, until they came upon the basin. It was vast and circular, miles across, the ground scorched black. In its center stood a structure half buried in the crust metal. Stone and bone fused into a single colossal dome. Runes older than spoken language pulsed across its surface in lines of fire and ash. Chains thicker than castle walls were driven into the land around it, holding the forge in place like a beast struggling to rise. Vina let out a long breath. This isn't a forge. No, Sulla said, eyes narrowing. It's a prison. They descended. Each step closer thickened the air. Magic warped. Venus sigil plates glitched with sudden flares of heat. Halian's blade hummed with unease, the edge dimming under the weight of some unnamed pressure. Solace felt it pressing inward, not from above, but from beneath. Like a heartbeat rising from the earth, a voice echoed from nowhere. "Return me to fire." They froze. The voice wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It vibrated through their bones, spoke in their memories. Solace saw flashes of a forge's core, molten silver, running like blood across metal veins. He saw chains being wrapped, not by jailers but by the prisoner itself. "What is this place?" Halian asked, sword half raised. "A pact-bound crucible," Vina murmured. "Built in an age when magic bled into matter directly. This isn't just a prison, it's a lot." The scroll pulsed in Solace's bag. When he unrolled it, the ash left from Mirror Hollow had formed a new mark over the forge. A single word shimmered where there had been none before. "Confess." Solace walked forward. The dome opened like an eye. Metal groaned. Chains slithered back. A stairway formed from overlapping plates of iron and obsidian, descending into the structure. Without waiting, Solace entered. Vina followed without hesitation. Halian muttered something under his breath and went last. Inside, the forge was not lit. It burned. The air shimmered with heat and memory. Walls shifted, rearranging themselves with every breath. They moved through a hall that seemed endless, though each step changed its shape. One moment, an anvil-strewn foundry. The next, a hallway of mirrors reflecting different versions of the three of them. One showed Halian kneeling, his blade shattered. Another showed Vina encased in a crystal of her own making, eyes glowing like torches. In every reflection, Solace stood alone, older, more distant, less human. They reached the heart of the forge after hours that could have been minutes. It was a sphere, open to nothing and everything. In its center hovered a shape, vaguely humanoid, made of molten plates and arcane fire, suspended in place by dozens of anchored chains. "I know you," the being said without speaking. "You bear the echo's scar." Solace stepped forward. "I came to break the tether." "You cannot destroy what you have not named," it replied. "You seek to sever, but have not confessed what you fear becoming." Vina placed a hand on Solace's shoulder. "This isn't a trial of strength." "No," said Halian, "it's of truth." The forge being extended a hand. Flame curled into a mirror of brass and bone. "Step forward, let the forge show you." Solace took the mirror. He saw himself fractured, endless, layered across realities. In one, he ruled from a floating citadel, magic spilling from his hands like rivers. In another, he stood alone in a dead city, his eyes hollow, his voice a whisper of entropy. In all of them, he survived. But in none of them did he love. In none of them did he hold on to connection. Power had isolated him. Even in victory, he was a tomb. "I don't want this," he said. The being's voice rumbled. "But you do, that is why it waits for you." Solace dropped the mirror. It didn't shatter, it melted into the floor. The chains around the being began to glow brighter. "Then let that be the confession," the being said. "You are tempted," and that temptation burst the echo. A ring of light exploded outward from the sphere. Chains snapped. One by one, they retracted into the walls. The being slowly descended, its fire dimming. "The forge remembers you," it said to Solace, "and it accepts your burden." The scroll disintegrated again. They climbed back in silence. When they emerged from the dome, the sky was clearer. The smoke had lifted. The chains that had bound the forge were gone, replaced by massive scorch marks like brandings in the earth. Solace felt lighter, not free but understood, and that weight, that shared understanding with the forge's ancient spirit, lent him something new. Balance. They camped a mile away near a cracked ridge, where strange birds with ceramic wings nested. That night, Halian spoke first. "What happens when you run out of places to confess?" Solace stared at the stars. "Then I stop pretending I'm better than what waits in the dark." Vina watched him for a long time. "We're not here to keep you from becoming something terrible," she said. "We're here so you don't become it alone." He didn't answer. The third site was called the Archive Without Doors. It was not on the ground, it floated. Suspended over the plains of Sherival, the archive hovered 100 feet in the air, a geometric impossibility of shifting blocks and stairways, encased in a dome of rippling glass. No visible way in, no entrances, no paths, no ladders. Yet dozens of scholars had once lived there, studying forbidden texts that wrote themselves. The story went that the archive had vanished 50 years ago. No trace, gone overnight. It reappeared 2 days after they left the Weeping Fort. The scroll had turned jet black before Solace touched it again. When he laid his palm on the surface, lines of silver etched themselves into the paper, resolving into a symbol none of them could read. Then the paper ignited, reformed and burned away to ash in his hand. "That's 3, Halian said grimly. 2 left." They reached the floating structure within a day. Vina spent most of that time devising entry methods. None worked. Her grappling sigil shorted. Her binding spells refused anchor point. Even Hallian's attempt to fire an arrow through the dome was thwarted. The arrow turned to chalk mid-air. "I think we're supposed to go differently," Sullus said. He stepped forward and let his flux rise, not wildly, but as an offering. The air shimmered. A single stair appeared, carved from solid language, sentences spiraling into form. Each step a phrase in an unknown tongue. Sullus began to climb. "Of course it responds to you," Vina muttered, following. The archive pulsed with memory. Each block floated on its own axis, yet formed stable platforms the moment they stepped upon them. Walls rearranged themselves, not randomly, but purposefully, aligning in response to their movement. Leaves trailed behind them like smoke. At the heart of the structure, they found a book. It sat on a pedestal of bone and star metal. It had no title, no pages, only a cover made of something that shifted depending on who looked at it. When Sullus touched it, the book opened. No words, no ink. Instead, it played sound, a chorus of voices from 100 different Sulluses, each speaking at once. Some laughed, some screamed, some whispered things no sane man would repeat. But one voice spoke above the others. "You opened this book before," it said. "You will open it again." "Show me," Sullus whispered. And it did. Visions exploded across the room, of a world consumed by mirror fire, cities folding into themselves, Vina's corpse lying beside a shattered glyph wheel, Hallian's sword embedded in Sullus's chest, as tears ran down his face. Then silent. "You resist this," the book said, "but you created it." Sullus gritted his teeth. "I am not him." "No, but you can be." Vina reached out, linking her flux to his. Hallian gripped his shoulder. Together, they formed a circuit. Not a spell, not a ward, but a choice. "I'm not alone anymore," Sullus said. The book closed. The archive shook, blocks shifting violently. A stair reformed beneath them, leading downward. When they emerged on the plains, the archive was gone. The air felt thinner. The stars seemed closer. Only one location remained. The scroll had been reduced to a single glyph in Sullus's palm. It glowed faintly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. When he closed his hand, it burned into his skin like a brand. They didn't speak as they walked into the dusk. They didn't need to. They crossed into the ruins of Islandar, beneath the hush of dawnlight, that brief and trembling moment when the sky did not yet know whether to remain violet or become gold. The fourth and penultimate location marked by the scroll, now burned into Sullus's palm, lay somewhere with. The name of the place was not given in ink or ash, but spoken aloud by a windless gust that hissed through his ears 2 nights prior. The morning gate. Vina had recorded the resonance of the utterance and matched it to pre-collapse dialects, spoken in the Western Armathan tongues, once believed extinct. The word morning, in that tongue referred not to grief, but to the practice of severing memory from time. A funeral of recollection, a forgetting performed by choice. Islandar itself was vast, sunken, and dreamlike, one part jungle-choked ruin, one part labyrinth. Its roads were not made of stone or dirt, but of hex steel slats that pulsed weakly with residual energy. Vina suspected they had once been self-aware, able to restructure the city's layout based on the thoughts of its inhabitants. Now the city was mostly silent. Almost. They'd been walking no more than half an hour when Sullus felt the air tighten. His flux stirred, prickling at the back of his skull. He stopped. The others halted beside him, weapons not drawn but close to hand. In the middle of what might have once been a plaza lay a pool of clear water, untouched by the rotten moss that plagued the rest of the city. In its center floated a single glass sphere, unmoving, flawless, yet humming in harmony with something inside Sullus's chest. "That wasn't here until you got closer," Hallian muttered, already stepping wide to flank its edge. "It's a primer," Vina said, her voice almost reverent. "Some old devices were keyed to identity, not touch. It's waiting for Sullus." He approached. Each step forward made the flux inside his body hum louder, until it resonated with the sphere in perfect unison. When he reached the water's edge, the sphere broke. Not shattered, no shards. It simply split down the center and unfolded into light, casting a gate into existence. The morning gate. It was a mirror, but not like the one in the hollow. This one did not reflect the world, or even Sullus's image. Instead, it showed scenes, moments, people. None of them familiar at first, but Sullus knew they belonged to him. Memories not yet lived. Futures denied. Faces of allies he had never met. Children he had never raised. Enemies he had not killed. An entire lifetime of might-have-beens and will-be-nots. Hallian spoke quietly. "It's showing you what it will cost." "No," Vina said. "It's showing him what it has cost." Every time the echo has crept closer, a path has vanished. He's already lost these. Silas reached forward. The mirror recoiled, but only slightly, not in rejection, but in warning. You're not here to destroy anything, Vina said suddenly. You're here to leave something behind. What? Hallian asked. Your memory. That's what mourning means here. The cost of closing this gate is memory. Something important, something central. Silas stared at the glass. He already knew the gate wanted one of them. Not physically, but the memory of them. It wanted to remove someone from his mind, permanently, completely, as if they'd never existed. That was the price. He looked at Vina, her sharp eyes always watching too closely, always thinking 3 layers deeper than anyone should. Then at Hallian, whose hand still rested on the hilt of that same beaten sword he never gave a name to. He turned back to the mirror. No, Vina stepped forward. You can't avoid it. I'm not choosing between you, Silas said, voice low, steady. I'm choosing me. I'm giving it a memory of myself. One I don't want. One I've held on to for too long. They didn't ask. He placed his palm to the glass. The world inverted. He was 6 years old again, standing over the body of his father in a rain-filled trench behind the village. His mother's hand was tight around his wrist, trying to pull him away, but Silas wouldn't let go. The corpse didn't weep. It didn't even bleed anymore. Just stared, unblinking. The man had died shouting Silas's name, and Silas had done nothing. He had never told anyone that part. That moment had shaped everything. The loneliness, the silence, the need to be strong, even when he didn't understand what strength was. The endless drive to move forward without ever looking back. I release it, Silas said. The image burned. The memory collapsed. Not forgotten. Removed. Even as he stepped back, he could feel the hole it left. He knew the shape of it, but not the content. He no longer remembered why he hated graveyards, why he always stared too long at the rain. It was gone. But in its place the gate was closing. Not just closing, unmaking. The link tethering the echo to this possible self unraveled, frayed by grief accepted, and abandoned. The gate vanished. Silas collapsed to his knees, breath ragged. Rena caught him before he fell forward. Hallian stood beside them, watching the now still surface of the water. It was no longer glassy. It rippled, disturbed, ordinary. That's 4, Hallian said. Rena didn't reply. Her face was tight with fury. Not at Silas but at the cost. She understood what it meant to sever memory like that, what it did to a soul. They camped inside a half-collapsed spire that night, fireless and silent. Silas slept fitfully, if at all. Dreams clawed at his mind, disjointed things, memories out of order, faces without names. But one remained steady, a woman standing on a black shore, wind tugging at her long gray robes, her face hidden by a veil made not of cloth but time. She said nothing, just raised a hand. When he woke, he remembered her. He just didn't remember why. The final location was not distant. In fact, it was following them. 2 nights after they left the ruins, the air changed again. The sky turned darker. Though no cloud obscured it, the stars blinked out one by one. Wind died. The birds, strange, mutated things in the region, vanished, and with them sound. It began with footsteps, not their own. At first, they thought it was an echo, but Silas recognized the rhythm. It matched his exactly. Then came the breath, not heard, but felt, against the back of his neck even when no one stood there. Hallian drew his blade and wore. It's close. Vina activated 4 of her tether rings, forming a defensive web around their camp. It's not waiting anymore. It knows. Silas stood. It's time. The others nodded. They didn't move far. The confrontation was inevitable. In the open plains beneath a fractured sky, they found a clearing filled with standing stones, old, marked with sigils. Silas could almost read, not written language, not arcane, but emotion. He could feel their meaning, grief, hope, sacrifice, cycles, ends, and in the center, it waited. The echo. It no longer mimicked his shape completely. It had changed, grown taller, more angular, its limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. Its skin reflected everything around it except for Silas. It moved with purpose, but without tension. Its presence was undeniable. It turned its head slowly. You are late, it said. Silas stepped forward. I've been severing your paths, and sealing your own. It replied. You think this limits me. It does not. It defines me. I exist now. Your effort has written me into the pattern. You're a parasite, Vina said coldly. It ignored her. One step remains. The self must choose. You cannot defeat me through ritual or blade. Then how? Hallian asked. The echo spread its arms. Invite me, or destroy yourself. Those are the only 2 doors left. Salus didn't hesitate. He advanced. His flux surged, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. For the first time he let it take shape, not reacting to danger but responding to him. He shaped his truth into it. Not power, not force, identity. I am not you, Salus said. The echo smiled. But you could have been. And that's the point. I chose otherwise. He stepped into the circle of stones. The echo matched him. For a breathless moment, they stood inches apart. Reflections. Incomplete. Then the stones lit. Each one blazed with the memory of a place they had been. Mira Hollow, the Weeping Forge, the Archive, the Morning Gate. The flux from each poured into the ring, forming a cage, not of imprisonment, but choice. Salus reached forward. The echo reached back. Their hands met. The explosion was silent. When the light faded, only Salus remained standing. The echo was gone, not destroyed. Unwritten, its presence collapsed, denied by the totality of Salus's will. Not by brute force, but by refusal. The echo could only live so long as the path remained open, and Salus had closed every one of them. He turned. Vina and Halion waited, watching. Halion didn't speak. Vina gave a small nod. No celebration, no cheering, just acknowledgement. It's done, Salus said. For now, Vina replied. They walked. No fanfare, no return to the academy. There was no one to return to. The academy was still there, no doubt, but Salus had passed beyond its reach. What remained for him now was unknown, but it was his. No echoes, no tethers, just the path he chose to walk forward, alone. Yet they reached the Whispering Straits by twilight, a desolate stretch of stone and sea where the horizon bled into the sky like ink-soaking paper. Jagged cliffs reared from the ground like the ribs of some dead giant, and between them ran a narrow gorge split by saltwater channels that moved too quickly to be tide and too slowly to be river. The straits were not on any map, not even Vina's hidden copy. They had arrived here without realizing it, guided not by scroll or chart, but by the absence of everything else. There was nowhere else to go. The echo was gone. The scroll had crumbled to its last fleck of ash. Salus felt the emptiness in his palm like a forgotten scar. No wind, no bird, only the water's eternal murmur, soft, constant, too regular to be natural. It spoke, if only you listened. Salus had no interest in what it said. He wasn't sure what this place was meant to be. A conclusion? No. They had agreed long ago that there would be no final destination, only continuations. But something about the straits felt liminal, a threshold, not a border to cross, but a depth to descend. He didn't want to step forward, but his feet moved anyway. Halion followed without a word. Finan hung back a moment, her eyes darting along the cliff faces, tracing patterns etched in stone, not glyphs, scratches, deep, ragged ones, like claw marks. She recorded one just briefly, then hurried to catch up. They made camp beside a pool formed by a collapsed channel. The water was mirror smooth, but when Salus glanced into it, his reflection did not look back. Instead, it showed the silhouette of someone standing behind him, too tall, too distant. He turned quickly. No one there. The water rippled. I'm not sure this place is real, Halion said later, feeding dry briarwood into the small fire Finan had coaxed into existence. It's real, Finan replied, cross-legged and fiddling with the fractured core of a runic compass. But it's not here. Salus looked up. What do you mean? She flicked the compass into the air. It hovered, spun wildly and shattered. We're still in the world, but the world is bending around us, like it's making space. For what? Halion asked. Vina looked at Salus, him. They all stared into the fire after. At midnight, Salus awoke, not from noise but absence. The straits were silent, completely. Not even the water moved. The fire had gone out without embers. Halion and Venus still slept, but their breathing had quieted to near nothing. Salus stood. The pool's surface shimmered again, not as water but as glass. No, not even that. It became space itself, flattened, reflecting not the world but a truth behind it. Then a voice spoke, not in his head, but around it. You've walked all the paths. He turned. A figure stood beyond the pool. Not the echo, not a copy. Something else. Robes darker than the sky, a face obscured by endless shadow, and hands clasped behind its back. Its presence pressed down on the world like the weight of old stone. It did not move, did not threaten. I've destroyed what you sent, Salus said. We sent nothing. That was you. No, that was the echo. That wasn't you. The figure interrupted, voice never rising. That was a branch of your pattern, a potential, born when your world fractured. preserved by the space between. What are you? The figure tilted its head. We are the unbound choir. What remains when a pattern breaks? What endures when the path is denied? You are singular, but not unique. I don't understand. You do. Silas swallowed. Why are you here? To offer. The figure raised one hand. Between its fingers flickered a small flame. Not fire, not light, but something older. It spun, twisted, extended into threads. Each one pulsed like heartbeat echoes, and with each pulse, Silas saw flashes, other worlds, other hymns, other outcomes, some glorious, some monstrous, some quiet. You are whole now, but you are not complete. We offer choice. Silas stepped back. I don't want another path. Then we offer memory, knowledge you severed, echoes you cast aside, the cost you paid to win. Return it, reclaim it, remember what you chose to forget. He thought of the memory taken at the morning gate, the face of his father, the cold rain, the trench, his mother's scream. He remembered the shape, but not the pain. If I take it back, what happens? You will remember, fully, and you will carry it, forever. Silas didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands. They trembled, not from fear, from weight. He had fought so long, closed breach after breach, denied power, rejected easy paths, built his future from broken pieces. But was he still whole without that memory? Had he ever been? I want it, he said finally. The figure lowered its hand. The thread spiraled into his chest. Silas didn't scream. He inhaled. The memory hit like a star falling into his ribcage. A lifetime compressed into a single moment. The trench. The body. His father's face frozen in mid-word. His own scream, hoarse and childlike, echoing across an empty field. His mother's hands, warm but shaking. The funeral no one attended. The silence that followed him every day since. He felt. When he woke, Vena and Halion stood over him, concern etched into their faces. I saw him, Silas whispered. I remember him. Neither asked who. They helped him sit up. The straits were different now. The sky was not darker, but clearer. The water moved again. The cliffs no longer felt sharp. The wind returned. The world isn't bending anymore. Vena said. No, Silas agreed. It settled. They left the straits 3 days later. No road waited. No task pulled them forward. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no destination. Yet they walked. They crossed into the borderlands of Earthrin Vale, where storm lights danced at dusk and moss grew in spirals around ironwood trees. Travelers passed them on the road now, wandering clerics, sky-mad scholars, retired duelists. No one recognized Silas. That was good. He didn't want recognition. Not yet. Vena found a tower, abandoned. Sound, high ground with defensible access and enough space to form a small library. Halion called it a fort, but he said the word with a grin. Silas didn't argue. They made it theirs. Seasons passed. Silas grew, not in power that had always been present, but in clarity. He no longer reached for his flux. It answered him, not as a tool, but as a voice, a partner. Magic in this world did not serve the user. It shaped with them. Now that his own shape was clear, it followed easily. He taught not many, just a few. Wanderers came, some by accident, some by rumor. They stayed, they trained, they left. Some returned, most didn't. That was fine. He never called it a school. He never called himself a master. But word spread, a place in the wilds, without doctrine or creed, where the broken might find understanding, where no questions were refused, where the strange were accepted, where no one had to become what others expected. He didn't write that, but others did. Vena began binding her research into volume, not to impress the academic circles she'd long since stopped respecting, but to preserve what she learned. Halion trained the newer arrivals. Strict, harsh, fair. He became the wall they all leaned on when the world buckled. He never said so aloud, but Silas knew he liked it. The tower grew, not taller, but deeper. Rooms reshaped. New halls emerged. The structure, like the world, responded to intention. One night, Silas dreamed of a garden, and the next morning, it was there, just past the south arch, filled with thorned lilies and sky-colored vines. No one asked questions. One evening, a child arrived, unmarked, alone, holding nothing but a fragment of a broken sigil plate and a satchel of white chalk. Silas asked her name. She said, I don't know. He nodded. Then, choose one. She blinked, then said, Dana. He smiled. Then that's who you are. She stayed. Others followed. He taught what he could. Not spells, not forms, but choice. Years passed. He changed. Not physically. He barely aged. His body had long since harmonized with flux in ways that defied decay, but his presence changed. People stood straighter when he entered a room, not from fear, from gravity. He had weight now, not the crushing kind, the kind that made others sure of where they stood. One morning, Vina found him in the garden. She carried a sealed book, one she had spent 2 years writing. She handed it to him. Theory of Harmonic Flux Interruption. He read aloud, a treatise by. Don't read the rest out loud, she muttered. He smiled and opened it, read the first page, then the second, then looked at her. This is brilliant, I know, but I'm leaving. There's a city south of the mirrored spires, she said. They think like I do, they're building something new. I want to be part of it. Silas nodded. You should go. I want to come back. You always will, she hugged him. That was new. She left the next morning. Hallian left a week later. No goodbye. Just a note. I found a student who reminds me of you. Don't worry, I'll be back before she outgrows me. Silas laughed when he read it. He was alone again, but not really. Dina still trained every morning. The tower still grew. The world still turned. And sometimes at night, he looked to the sky and saw the places he had been. Mirror Hollow, the Forge, the Archive, the Gate, the Straits. Not as memories, as stories, and stories never end. The tower weathered its first true storm on the 73rd day of high wind season. It came in silence, preceded by no lightning, no thunder, only a deepening gloom that turned midday into dusk, and pulled the breath from the land. Silas stood on the south balcony when the pressure shifted, the air so still it seemed to strain with weight. Far off, across the flatland beyond the thornfield, the sky ruptured, not in color, not in cloud, but in presence. A darkness rose, not malevolent, but curious. The wind did not begin so much as emerge, not from the horizon but from within the earth itself. The vines in the garden shrank, curling inward, the ironwood trees twisted, their bark glinting with the sheen of unnatural frost. The flux stirred beneath Silas's skin, not in warning, but recognition. Something old was approaching. He descended the tower steps without haste. Dana was already in the central atrium, barefoot and crouched beside the roanstone that had emerged 2 weeks ago from beneath the floor. She'd been talking to it in riddles ever since. She looked up as he entered, her expression untroubled, even amused. It's just the wind that walks, she said. The old kind, the one that never learned how to howl. You should be below, Silas said, already extending his senses into the walls of the tower. The structure was holding. The anchors were stable. The wards Vina had woven before leaving were dormant, not reacting. Whatever this storm was, it didn't threaten the tower. But it meant something. The world didn't conjure storms like this without reason. I don't think it's coming for us, Dina added, placing a hand against the stone. I think it's looking. Silas approached the window as the wind found its voice. Not a scream, but a whisper drawn across metal. The plains beyond the tower turned silver. The grass flattened in concentric rings. No lightning, no rain, just a presence moving across the world. It passed them by within the hour, leaving only silence in its wake. That night, Silas didn't sleep. Instead, he returned to the uppermost chamber. The observatory Vina had reshaped with her will before departing. There, beneath a ceiling of shifting crystal glass, he traced constellations that hadn't existed before. The storm had changed something. Not the land, not the sky. His thoughts came sharper, memories clearer. He remembered the voice of the unbound choir, the figure beside the pool, the offer, the path he'd chosen instead. It hadn't been the end. It had simply been the pause before something else arrived. In the weeks that followed, strangers came more frequently. Some were students, eager to learn. Others were seekers, mages, smiths or wanderers, who had touched the edge of some unknown and come back changed. They brought with them rumors of a new city rising to the southeast, a circular bastion of stone and sky where all forms of magic were being studied openly. Silas knew at once that Vina had reached her destination. Her name wasn't spoken by the messengers, but her presence lingered in their descriptions. Spinning libraries, self-translating stone tablets, runes that sang when touched. Her handprints, metaphoric or otherwise, were all over it. Hallion too began sending messages. Not letters, but artifacts. First a blade forged of sea glass and stormlight, wrapped in a note that read simply, "This one hums when it's near fire." Then, a crystal flute that played without wind. Then, a vial of liquid shadow sealed with 3 locks and a warning. Do not open unless you are alone and unafraid. Silas kept them all in the lower vault. Kirina tried to steal them once, failed and then confessed before even being asked. Her penance was to carry the entire vault key on a chain twice her weight for a day. But the next morning she was back at training, asking him to explain why her flux turned green whenever she felt ashamed. It's not the emotion, Solus told her, redirecting the energy through a spiral-shaped binding pattern. It's what the emotion anchors to. Shame is rooted in memory. That memory influences the shape your flux takes. So what happens if I forget the memory? Then you reshape the current. Can I forget it on purpose? You can try. She did, and it worked. Her flux turned silver for a full minute. Then it exploded and painted the courtyard wall in spiraling, luminous vines. She was thrilled. Solus spent 3 days scrubbing the residue from the stonework. Life at the tower settled into rhythm. Morning sessions of theory, afternoon practice, evening reflections. Visitors came and went. The wilds around them began to change. The tower's magic extended, passively at first, spreading warmth across the bitter valleys, encouraging old trees to bloom. The flux harmonized with the land, not aggressively, but gently reshaping the space around the tower into something balanced. Then, 3 months after the storm, someone new arrived. He wore no armor, no robes, no sigils, just a brown cloak and sandals too light for the cold. His eyes were old, not in age but in depth. When Solus met him at the outer gate, the man did not bow or offer a name. "I was told I would find you here," the man said, "that you had walked all the places that were once broken." "I've walked a few," Solus replied. "Then you have walked more than most." "I seek not your power but your understanding." Solus didn't answer at first. He studied the man's hands, steady, worn, but unscarred. This was not a warrior, not a scholar either. He carried no tools, no scrolls. "Come in," Solus said eventually. "There's room." He introduced himself later as Errol. Not a title, not a lineage, just a name. He spoke little, listened often. In the following days he attended the training sessions without comment, never participating, but watching with unsettling focus. Dana grew irritated with his silence, calling him the statue behind his back. He smiled once, just barely, when she said it to his face. On the 10th day, Errol approached Solus in the garden. The lilies were blooming again, now tinged with blue, an after effect of one of Dana's failed sigil harmonies. "Have you ever wondered," Errol began, "if the echo you faced was not a corruption, but a warning?" Solus said nothing. Errol continued, "We think of power as a path, often one with consequences. You saw the worst of your possibilities, but what if that was not the price of taking the wrong path, but the cost of refusing your nature?" "I chose my nature." "No. You chose your fear of it." Solus turned. "You speak like the choir. I have heard them." Once. A pause. "Where?" Solus asked. "In the wound," Errol said simply. Before it closed, Solus froze. The wound had not been mentioned in over a year. Not even by the wanderers or the song carriers who brought news from the edges of the continent. It had been sealed, they'd said, forgotten. But if Errol had heard the choir, then it meant something was stirring again. "Why now?" Solus asked. "Because the world is remembering." Errol turned and walked away, leaving only the scent of copper in the air. That night, Solus returned to the observatory. The sky was still, but not silent. He extended his flux, not with effort, but with invitation. The world responded immediately. Patterns rose in the stars, shapes in the wind. A single note echoed through his chest, not musical, but fundamental. Below him, the tower pulsed once, just once. Then everything stilled. A presence filled the space around him, vast and gentle. "You have shaped a place where endings do not settle," it whispered. "You have chosen the path of memory, of becoming. We see you." It was not the choir, it was something deeper, not an echo, not a shadow, a beginning. Solus stood, no longer looking to the sky. He looked inward. The path ahead was unclear, but the path beneath him had been chosen, not fallen into. That difference mattered. Dana entered the observatory without knocking. "There's someone at the gate," she said, annoyed. "Wants to challenge you." "To a duel?" Solus asked. "No, to an argument. He's carrying 7 books and a map." Solus sighed. "Let him in." The tower endured, not because of walls or wards, but because it listened, and those who came here came not to conquer or claim, but to seek. That was the legacy he had chosen. A place not for heroes but for those unfinished, those still becoming. And so, the story continued, as it always would. The challenger at the gate introduced himself as Sildrun Mar, a self-proclaimed dialectic warrior from the Collegium of Interwoven Minds. He wore no armor and bore no weapon, but his coat was lined with parchment, and he carried a lacquered staff filled with retractable scroll. His voice was deep, measured, with the clipped inflection of someone used to being the final authority in a room. He stood with the posture of a duelist, but instead of eyeing Solus's stance or form, He examined his vocabulary. I am here to test your synthesis, Sildren said, unfurling a scroll and extending it like a duelist, offering the first strike. They say you survived the echo, not by defeating it, but by resolving it. That implies internal contradiction, master. I want to see if the same mastery exists in your speech. Denny, standing behind Solus with her arms crossed and a half squint that meant trouble, muttered, Is this one made of paper? Solus ignored her. He studied Soldrun's scroll. It was a dialectic schema, a formal challenge, written in symbolic grammar. Not a legal document or a spell, but a structured argument map, meant to contain and navigate live philosophical combat. To Solus it was like someone placing a sword at his feet and asking, Shall we begin? I'm not a philosopher, Solus said. Soldrun smiled. You are, you just use different ink. He accepted the scroll. They entered the atrium, and took seats across from each other at the long table where Vina had once drafted her flux sequence atlas. Solus felt her presence briefly in the wood beneath his hands. Denny hovered nearby, pretending not to listen while scribbling notes on her training diagrams. The argument began. Soldrun's opening gambit was elegant, constructed on the premise that all power demands recursion, that true influence, magical or otherwise, is only maintained through feedback. Control a thing, and it reflects you. Become a thing, and you reflect you. Solus let him build the structure before sliding a quiet contradiction beneath it. What of the self that shapes without reflection, that modifies without being modified? What of the will that distorts even the feedback loop? The paradox of self-aware influence. Soldrun's eyes narrowed slightly. He pivoted, shifting from recursion to narrative. Power, he argued, is story. Stories shape minds, and minds shape magic. But Solus countered with lived truth. Stories, he said, can be told in lies. Experience cannot. The difference between legend and memory is not in impact, but in origin. And Solus had paid in blood for every origin. By the third exchange, the energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't magic, but it moved like it. Words laced with intent, logic layered with will, ideas forming weapons sharper than blades. They weren't speaking just to debaters, they were trying to change each other. At the sixth reversal, Soldrun leaned back, not in defeat, but in understanding. You don't argue to win, he said. You argue to remain. Solus didn't smile. If I don't, something else takes my place. Soldrun stood, bowed. Then you've already passed. And with that, he left. No request for lodging. No desire to teach. He simply walked away, scrolls resealed, eyes bright with revelation. Denna gave a long exhale once the gate shut behind him. He talks like the tower reads, she said. But you talked like you remembered. That's the difference. Solus replied, rubbing his temples. I live here, he visits. Later that evening, Solus returned to the garden, not because he sought peace, but because the tower was shifting again. He could feel it in the room. New doors forming beneath the west wing, a staircase beginning where no room yet existed. The tower responded to people as much as to intention. It had grown taller in the months since Hallian and Vina left, and wider too, though no blueprints had ever been drawn. Solus didn't try to control it. He let it build what was needed. That night, a door appeared in the observatory. It was not shaped like the others, narrower, arched. It shimmered slightly as though resisting attention. When Solus reached for the handle, the door asked him not in words, but in feeling. Do you really want to know? He opened it. Inside was not a room. It was a field, a flat, empty plain under a starless sky. No wind, no sound, only the sense of pause. In the center stood a single table with a single object, a broken mask. He approached. The mask was not familiar, but it pulsed with his flux signature. It had once been worn by someone who used power like he did, but not him. A remnant, a relic, a possibility abandoned. He picked it up. Images surged. Not visions, memories, from a life that might have been. In this version, he had accepted the choir's offer, had taken the knowledge and become a warden of threads, an enforcer who traversed the space between realities, preserving balance through unmaking. He saw worlds extinguished by his hand, cities silenced, beings erased, all in the name of equilibrium, and in every act he had felt nothing. He dropped the mask. It clattered but did not shatter. Instead it returned to silence. Behind him a presence appeared. Not the echo, not the choir, just a man. He looked like Solus but older, hollow-eyed, with hands that shook slightly and a voice quieter than thought. You did well, he said. You turned away, you remembered what it means to care. You're not real, Solus replied. No, but I'm what you could have been. Then why are you here? To remind you, there's more than one way to die. The field vanished. Solus was back in the observatory. The arched door closed behind him. No trace of the mask, but in his chest a small thread had shifted. A new memory, not lived but witnessed, now hung beside the others. The next morning, Denna was waiting in the main hall with a frown carved deep into her face. The northern mirror cracked. Sullus blinked. Which one? The one with the boundary weave. It's humming. That mirror hadn't been touched in weeks. It served as a harmonic anchor monitoring dimensional tension. If it was reacting, then he was already halfway to the north wing before she could finish. The mirror was tall, half as high as the tower itself, set into a stone frame older than the foundation. It shimmered faintly, the runes carved along its edge pulsing in irregular sequence. But what made Sullus stop was what it showed. Not reflection, not the rune, but another tower, ruined, burning. He stepped closer. Within the mirror, a version of the tower collapsed inward as flames licked the edges of the sky. Figures ran, some recognizable, others not. And standing atop the rubble was a shape too familiar, a man in black wearing a mask of gold. Not the Echo, something else. Another Echo. Denna arrived behind him, panting. That's not from our world, is it? No, Sullus said, eyes narrowing. But it might be from a future. The mirror cracked, not from force, but exhaustion. It could no longer hold what it saw. Seal it? Denna asked. Not yet. They waited. The flames in the mirror died. The tower fell. The figure vanished. Then the mirror turned to glass again. But Sullus had seen enough. The Echo had not been the only one. It had been the closest, not the first. The choir had said he was a threat, not a unique one, just a strong one. And now, the resonance from other worlds was finding him again. Later, he stood alone in the vault. He opened Hallian's third gift, the vial of liquid shadow. It moved like ink and mercury, pulling away from light, coiling in spirals. Inside it, he saw images, not reflections, not memories, but calls. A dozen other versions of himself reaching out, sending warnings, questions, sometimes screams. One word repeated over and over, across their mouths. He arrives. Sullus sealed the vial again. The tower pulsed beneath his feet. This was no longer about becoming. It was about endurance. The echoes were coming. Not one. All. Not to reclaim him, but to test him. He turned toward the stair. Denna was already there, arms crossed, trying to look unimpressed. You're going to do something stupid, aren't you? Probably. Want help? Yes, she grinned. Finally, they descended into the heart of the tower. There, Sullus began building a room with no door. A chamber meant not to hold people or knowledge, but resonance. A place where echoes could be trapped, studied, and if necessary undone. It took weeks. During that time, more mirrors cracked. More strangers came. Some stayed. Some fled. But the tower held. And one day, just as the sun rose green against the horizon, Sullus opened the new chamber and whispered, "Let the echoes come." They did. The first echo did not arrive as a shape or voice, but as a temperature drop in the inner vault. It seeped through the flux seams between the walls, curling the air into silent vortices that tugged at parchment, shifted chalk, made every breath a little slower. Denna noticed it first. She was cataloging rune flux interactions in the training hall when her chalk began vibrating against the stone floor. She didn't speak, just walked straight to the observatory, and waited at the eastern archway where the tower's walls grew thinner, more responsive to flux tension. She was already there when Sullus arrived. He didn't need to ask what she'd felt. The tower had begun listening more intently since the Chamber of Echoes was constructed. Its walls bent slightly inward toward their footsteps, rooms humming faintly when Sullus passed. The resonance was rising, like pressure before a storm. The world knew what was coming, even if it hadn't given the shape a name yet. That night, the first echo arrived. It did not break through the walls or burst into form with a grand entry. It coalesced like mist given memory, forming at the center of the resonance chamber they had built, without fanfare or light. One moment the room was empty. The next a figure stood at its center, not masked, not cloaked, bare, pale, and perfectly still. Sullus entered alone. He had instructed Denna to watch from the control platform above, where she could adjust the room's flux-pacing threads if the resonance destabilized. The figure looked like Sullus down to the scar beneath the chin, the faint trace of burn across the left wrist, the slightly lopsided stance when weight shifted from heel to ball. But its eyes were wrong. They were entirely still. No curiosity, no recognition, not blank, not cruel, just void. The echo spoke with his voice. You closed the paths. Yes, you defined yourself. I did. And yet here I am. I know. The figure's head tilted. Then you understand that the act of choice does not destroy the potential. It displaces it. When a world burns in another thread, The smoke still reaches here. Solus said nothing. The echo stepped forward, not threateningly, almost cautiously. You think of me as a reflection, as a branch you pruned. I am not. I am a consequence. Solus raised a hand, and the resonance in the chamber thickened. Light did not brighten, but the shape of space bent slightly around the echo. You're not from a future I denied. No. The echo said, stepping into the distortion without pause. I'm from a future you enabled. Solus advanced. That world is broken. All worlds break. I survived mine. And so did you. Now our survival echoes. Behind the glass wall, Dana watched in silence, her hands on the rune controls, eyes flickering across data glyphs that translated emotional flux into readable waves. She noted that the echo was not hostile. Not exactly. But it was spreading. Its presence was leaking into the chamber walls, rewriting minor flux tethers in real time. Solus stepped closer until they were an arm's length apart. What do you want? Resolution. The echo replied. Not to replace you. To become still. Solus extended his hand. The echo mirrored him. Their fingers met, and in that moment, the chamber flared. Not light, not sound, just pressure, like a thought blooming too quickly. The echo convulsed, its shape bending inward, and then it collapsed into a spiral of silver-threaded smoke. Solus did not flinch. The flux harmonics rebalanced, and the room returned to silence. Dana released the tension in her shoulders as the glyphs went dark. The first echo was gone. 3 days later, the second arrived. This one came as a sound, not words, just a tone, single and clear, vibrating every piece of glass in the tower. It resonated through the main staircase, rippling into the east wing where the original training halls were located. It didn't form immediately. Instead, it built itself from the vibration. Walls shifted, stone curled, a body took shape out of colorless air. It was not Solus, not exactly. It was taller, gaunter, eyes lined with hollow glyphs. This echo spoke in thoughts, not words. Solus entered the hall and felt its presence before he saw it. The echo turned. You are awake. Yes. Solus replied. I am the part of you that chose understanding over action. I watched the world burn and chose not to interfere. I studied entropy until it taught me stillness. You let people die, I let people exist without me. You chose silence, I chose clarity. Solus summoned flux, not aggressively, but deliberately. The echo raised a hand. No battle, just integration. You want to merge? The echo stepped forward. I am not corrupted, I did not collapse. I am a truth, not the whole truth, but a portion. You must carry me or carry my absence. Solus hesitated, then allowed the flux to open. The echo stepped into him. The world blinked. For one heartbeat, Solus saw endless variations of inaction, versions of himself that stood aside in moments that demanded interference. Each bore a different cost. None bore satisfaction. When it was over, Solus remained standing, taller, colder, but not alone. Dena entered, eyes wary. That was faster. He didn't resist. Should I be worried? No. But he wasn't. Over the next month, 5 more echoes arrived. One came in fire, exploding into being through the vault doors in a burst of violet flame. This version screamed nothing but rage. It did not speak, only attack. It fought like a reflection unbound, mimicking every move Solus made with greater speed, greater intensity, until he changed his tactics entirely, drawing from the garden flux instead of the inner wells. The moment he did, the echo faltered. It had no knowledge of peace. He pressed the advantage not with violence but with stillness. He offered it no target, no enemy. Eventually, the echo imploded into ash. Another came as a child, barefoot, scarred, eyes too old. It asked for sanctuary, not release. Solus gave it a room. It vanished after a day, left behind a note written in a language Solus had not taught anyone. A message to himself, the ones you save are still you, don't forget. One spoke only in Vania's voice. Not her mannerisms, not her words, but her voice. It said things she had never said, could never say. It tried to convince Solus that he had doomed her to obscurity by not following her to the city, that she needed him and he chose distance. Solus did not argue. He simply remembered her eyes when she left. The pride, the purpose. That echo faded on its own. The echoes came from everywhere, from silence, from dust, from broken machines. Some were hostile, some were passive, some did not even notice Solus. They wandered, murmured, studied, then faded. He stopped trying to contain them. Instead, he started learning. The resonance chamber became a repository, not for containment, but for memory. Each echo left behind a trace, A shard of possibility, a tone, a fragment of intention. Soleis began weaving them together. Not to create a spell, not to build a weapon, but to understand the shape of himself across the multitudes, the pattern of his persistence. Donna watched the change quietly. She continued training, continued mapping Flux behavior, but she also began speaking less. Not because she was afraid, because she was listening. Then came the 13th echo. It did not arrive in form, it arrived in absence. Soleis awoke and the tower was gone. Not physically, but perceptually. The walls were there, but colorless. The furniture existed, but he could not remember its shape. Donna was a shadow at the edge of his vision. Flux did not respond to him. The world felt erased, and standing in the central atrium was the echo. It wore no form. It radiated unbecoming. Soleis stepped forward, but his feet made no sound. His breath did not stir the air. The echo spoke not aloud. In remove, I am the moment you considered ending. Soleis stilled. I am the hour you stared into absence, and wished to join it. He said nothing. I am the thought you did not say aloud. I remember you, Soleis whispered. Do you deny me? No. Do you reject me? No. Then what do you choose? Soleis looked into nothing and said, I carry you. The world snapped back. Color returned. Form stabilized. Donna gasped in nearby, clutching the edge of the wall. You dropped out of sync, she said, voice trembling. The whole tower shifted. The vines in the garden stopped moving. I was with an old part of me, Soleis said. And now, I brought it home. That night, the tower did not sleep. It hummed. Every floor, every stone, every rune. The flux settled into a rhythm Soleis had never felt before. Not chaotic, not ordered. Alive. The echoes had not come to claim him. They had come to reassemble him. Not the strongest version. Not the wisest. Not the most powerful. Just the most complete. He stood in the heart of the tower, alone, eyes closed, and for the first time since he followed the phantoms into the unknown forest, he understood why. Not to flee, not to fight, but to become. And the world, listening quietly around him, approved. They came without warning on the 24th morning of the pale cycle. Just as the moonlight was beginning to fade from the garden stones, and the sky returned to its usual silver-gray shimmer. Not echoes. Not fragments. These were people, 37 of them, in total, each one shaped by the world outside in ways Soleis had long since learned to read. The way they moved, stood, spoke. None were unscarred, none were simple. They arrived in quiet clusters, some on foot, some in floating carriages powered by thread-bound ether. The first to speak was a woman wrapped in wind-woven robes, bearing a staff made of memory wood. Her voice was calm, but beneath it was the edge of need. You are the one who listens to broken things, she said. Soleis met her gaze evenly and answered, I am. She nodded and stepped aside. Others followed, mages with misaligned cores, soldiers marked by wild curses, a child who spoke to birds but not to people, an old man whose hands carried fire he could not extinguish. Dina watched from the tower's east arch, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised so high it nearly touched her forehead. You planning to start a city? She asked, when the last of them settled in the lower hall. Soleis shook his head. No cities. They came to be heard, not ruled. She didn't argue. By nightfall, the tower had begun reshaping itself again. New corridors extended from the second floor. Dormitories unfolded from the stone like petals made of dusk. The garden expanded to the south and began producing fruit Silas had never tasted: starroot, breathvine, pulseberries. The tower responded not to command but to presence. As the new arrivals laid down packs, murmured their names, whispered fears, the tower breathed in their truth and made space. Silas did not address them formally. He did not lecture. Instead, he moved among them, listened. A boy with ghost-pale eyes told him that when he closed his hands, people forgot him. A woman with ink-tattooed veins said her dreams burned holes into nearby walls. A pair of siblings from the eastern fractures shared one body, shifting between who held it each time they slept. Silas offered them rooms, guidance, silence, whatever they needed. He did not try to fix anyone. That was the difference. He had stopped believing people could be repaired. They could only be accepted, understood, integrated. The tower's new rhythm was more than growth. It was purpose. Velma began organizing the arrivals into loose groups, not by ability but by instinct. Some studied the vines in the garden, learning how flux interacted with root pattern. Others mapped the tower's constantly shifting interior, discovering that entire rooms disappeared and returned depending on who was searching for them. A few attempted to reach the highest spire and found that the stairs never repeated themselves. Silas taught in brief, quiet sessions. He no longer explained how to manipulate power. Instead, he showed them how to understand their resonance, to listen to the way the world whispered back. A fire caller who could not control her flame learned to press her palms to soil before casting, grounding herself in the pulse of the earth. A dream singer who drew nightmares into reality learned to hewn counter-harmonics into stone to catch the worst of her conjured terrors. And through it all, Silas grew quieter, not distant, just focused. Errol was the first to speak of it. He approached one evening while Silas was rebuilding the flux thread paths beneath the southern watchtower, hands coated in moss light and copper dust. "You've changed," he said. "You're not chasing balance anymore. You're building it." Silas didn't reply at first. Then, without looking up, he said, "The echoes weren't the threat. They were the signal." Errol nodded. "And now, you wait for the real thing." Silas's hands paused. "I don't wait." The signal came 2 weeks later, just before dawn. The mirror room, once dormant, flared with energy. Not just one mirror, all of them. 37 separate visions ignited in unison, each reflecting a different place. Towers shattering, oceans folding in on themselves, creatures of pure flux devouring cities in impossible geometries. Dina called it a storm of recursion. Silas called it a warning. "They're aligning," he said, pointing to the overlap between mirror edges. "Not in time, in shape. These aren't separate echoes. They're harmonizing." Dina exhaled sharply. "That's what your tower's been preparing for. Not individual collapse. Convergence." Silas nodded. "We're not being visited anymore. We're being reached." He called everyone to the central garden that morning. No speech, no ceremony, just truth. He stood on the central stone that Vina once used for rune testing, hands loose at his sides, eyes level with the wind. "Something is coming," he said. "Not an enemy, not a catastrophe, something that remembers us, something that knows us. I don't ask you to fight it, I don't ask you to stop it. But I do ask you to be present, to witness, to remain." Some nodded. Others simply waited. That was enough. The tower shifted again that night. It didn't grow, it deepened. Rooms expanded inward, stairways led to internal landscapes. One chamber became a reflection pool with no water. Another turned into a forest where time moved slower beneath the leaves. Silas began placing flux thread anchors at key intersections. Dina sealed 2 mirrors that began overlapping realities into the southern wing. Errol reinforced the archive vault with emotion bindings that responded only to intention, not to spoken command. Everyone had a role. Then the sky changed, not slowly, not subtly. One afternoon, as the bells rang from the west balcony where the crystal vine had begun blooming, the sky fractured. Not visibly, but perception shifted. The clouds folded inward. The wind reversed. Light took on a sharpness that tasted of brass and old stone. Silas looked upward and saw lines, threads of energy, tension, memory, stretching across the firmament like a web woven by blind stars. He felt them vibrate. He heard a voice in the vibration. Not words, not the choir, something else, something waking. He went to the resonance chamber and stood at its center. He did not summon flux. He opened his memory. One by one, he recited the echoes he had encountered. Not as enemies. As selves, each one a path, each one a cause. He remembered the fireborn, the child, the void, the mirror, the watcher in the glass. He remembered their words, their choices, their silence. And then he opened the floor beneath the chamber, revealing a lower vault none had entered before. Not even Dana. The tower had kept it hidden until now. Within that vault, the air shimmered with old magic. Not ancient, just heavy. Every step Silas took reverberated backward through time. The room was not lit, but it was not dark. At the center stood a single construct. A loom made of silverwood and bone thread, its threads unspooled across a circular platform. This was the heart of the tower, the place where resonance became real. Silas sat before it. He reached forward, he touched the thread, and the world answered. Not with words, with return. Every echo he had absorbed, every possibility he had turned from, stepped into him. Not as invaders, as pieces. One by one, they reintegrated, not to override, but to complete. He saw the cold scholar with hands that never reached out, the masked enforcer who silenced imbalance with blade and void, the child who wept in the rain without ever learning why, the dreamer who watched the stars collapse, the one who said yes when the choir whispered. They entered, became, and he emerged. Not as one of them, as all of them. He stood, eyes closed, and when he opened them again, he saw the threads above the sky, stretching into all directions. He reached up, not physically, with intent, and the threads trembled. The convergence had begun. The mirrors in the east wing cracked, not from strain, from release. The tension they held had passed into him. The tower groaned, not in pain, but in expansion. It began unfolding into its next form. Not a building, not a sanctuary, a point of translation, a nexus, a node in the world's unseen fabric. Denna reached him an hour later, breathless. The echoes outside, she said. They're not echoes, they're people. Sullus nodded. They've always been. Beyond the garden, forms were approaching. Hundreds, thousands, not marching, aligning. People from collapsed threads, survivors from unraveled realities, variants of the same name, possibilities given breath, all converging on one place. The tower stood still, and Sullus waited, not as a guardian, not as a guide, as a root, because now the story was no longer about him. It was about what grew from the place where he remained. They came not in waves, but in a steady, unbroken flow, each one stepping through fractures in the world that had once been called impossible to cross, no longer constrained by the borders that had once separated realms of possibility. They came alone in pairs, in groups of 12, wearing robes from forgotten orders, armor forged in the heat of vanished suns, faces carved by the weight of paths they had not chosen. None of them carried certainty. All of them carried memory. And when they reached the base of the tower, they did not speak as supplicants or challengers. They stood quietly, as if they had arrived home without understanding how or why. Sullus met them not from a height, not from a place of command, but as an equal among them, standing barefoot in the flux-threaded soil of the garden, letting the earth shape its rhythm through the soles of his feet. The tower no longer pulsed in response to his presence alone. It pulsed in harmony with the entire field of converging selves and almost selves, each one bearing a fragment of resonance that added to the whole. Denna moved among the new arrivals like a fire not yet banked, her eyes sharp, her questions sharper, ensuring that none brought harm, none carried broken intent beneath calm speech, or sat in the west alcove beneath the flowering vine and said nothing, eyes always on the sky as if watching the shape of some cosmic loom unspool across dimensions. They could no longer ignore. Sullus began calling the arrivals what they were. Refractions, not simply echoes or alternatives, but entire realities focused into a single thread point. They brought with them languages that twisted known words into new meanings, spells that refused to function unless spoken while weeping, instruments that captured the tone of grief and bent it into weapons. One arrived carrying an infant wrapped in velvet made from still light, saying only that the child had never known fear and must never be taught it. Another arrived walking side by side with her own echo, the two of them speaking in alternating sentences, sometimes contradicting, sometimes completing each other. One did not arrive at all, but formed from the ground beneath the tower's foundation, an old shape of Sullus that had never left the place where he was first broken, rising now not to reclaim anything but to witness the space he had grown into. The tower adapted, its lower floors folded outward and downward simultaneously, forming rooms that hung in the air like fruit from unseen branches. Passageways shifted to accommodate not movement, but emotion. Doors opened only when the walker understood what question they were avoiding. The central chamber became a living library, one that did not store books but impressions, a knowledge pool fed by every mind that passed through it. Sullus could walk through the vault and feel the memories touch the thought of a smith who had once reforged a dying star, feel the regret of a priest who had rewritten his god's final sermon and never told anyone. Hear the silence of a dancer who had once ended a war by never moving again. This was not study, it was communion. They did not call it a school, they called it the place between, not because it lay between dimensions or because of its liminal nature, but because it allowed those who came to rest between who they had been and who they were becoming. It did not promise answers, it promised time. Sullus had long since learned that time was the rarest form of magic, not because it was scarce but because it was never given without cost. He gave it freely now and the tower gave it with him. There were challenges. Not all who arrived did so in peace. One refraction came screaming, her body covered in shifting script that lashed out with every breath, tearing grooves into stone, unraveling sigils just by proximity. She carried a truth that her world had buried her with, that the only way to preserve identity was to destroy everything that tried to define it. Silas met her in the reflection garden, surrounded by still pools that did not reflect faces but only memories willingly surrendered. He stood without armor, without wards, and let her rage burn through the garden, allowed her words to split the air open, her breath to crack glass. When she fell to her knees, bleeding silver tears from eyes that had not closed in decades, he knelt beside her and whispered, not forgiveness, not correction, but a single phrase. You are not required to stay broken just because the world is used to it. She slept for 3 days in the tower's breath room, where the walls exhaled calm and the beds reshaped to the spine's memories. When she woke, she no longer screamed. She joined the ones who maintained the roots. One night, the moon failed to rise. Not hidden, absent, the sky was blank. Flecks behaved erratically. The stars refused alignment. Those who had once carried stable resonance now found their threads drifting, forming new harmonics that clashed with everything they had once known. Silas stood at the peak of the tower, where wind never touched and time bent slightly around the spire, and spoke a single thought into the air. The tower caught it, amplified it, released it across the threads. It was not a command, it was not even a solution. It was simply presence. We are here, we remain. That is enough. The stars returned. The sky resumed its shape. The tower hummed again. Dinah approached him after that, holding a fractured compass, whose needle pointed always inward. She had built it herself to test whether the tower was expanding or the world was contracting. Her conclusion unsettled her. I don't think we're standing still, she said. I think the world is curling around us. Like the story wants to center here. Silas looked at the compass, then at the horizon, then at her. Let it. We're not here to escape it. We're here to carry it. She raised an eyebrow. You've been talking like that more often lately. He shrugged. I've been listening more closely. Errol returned from his inner walks with a warning, not of danger but of approach. Something large was moving across the outer threads, something that did not resemble a person, a world, or an echo. It was not a being. It was a narrative mass, a convergence of unspoken stories drawn together by absence. Errol called it the crownless. No name, no face, no purpose except to erase. Not by violence, by overriding. It would come not to destroy the tower but to integrate it into something blank. Silas understood. The echoes had prepared him for it. The tower had grown for it. They began reinforcing the tower not with stone or spells but with story. Each member of the place between offered a truth, something unrepeatable, something vital. These were etched into the garden vines, woven into the wind-struck bells, poured into the water basins in the hall of breath. A name spoken in fear, a note sung only once, a mistake never corrected, a promise half kept. These became the tower's defense, not barriers, but anchor. The tower would not fight. It would refuse to be replaced, and then the crownless arrived. It came not as a shadow, not as an army, but as a pause. The horizon folded. The wind ceased. The grass bent inward. The tower did not respond with resistance. It responded with recognition. Goliath stood at the center of the resonance chamber, surrounded by every refraction who had chosen to stay, and opened the chamber's core. It glowed not with power, but with intention. They did not cast spells, they did not raise defenses, they told story. One by one, each voice rose, not in volume but in clarity. A smith sang of the hammer she used to break her brother's chains. A child whispered of the creature that taught her how to sleep without fear. A man recited the name of the river that had erased his face and given him peace. A woman called forth a lullaby that had ended a plague. Diana simply said the word remember. And Silas, standing at the center, said, We are the pieces we did not throw away. We are the lives we chose to carry. We are the echoes that built instead of broke. Crownless reached the edge of the tower and stopped, not in confusion, in consideration. Then it tried to speak, not in voice, in replacement. One by one, it offered stories. It wanted to overwrite tales where the tower never formed, where the echoes won, where Silas accepted the choir's offer, where Dana never found her name. The tower shook. The flux lines wavered, reality blurred. But no story vanished, not a single one, because the tower remembered, because Silas remained. And the crownless, for the first time in its existence, encountered a thing it could not rewrite. So it paused. Then it left. No storm, no collapse, just absence. And in its wake the tower breathed. That night, the stars shifted again, not returning to their former shapes, forming new ones. Dana mapped them from the West Observatory, eyes wide. This pattern doesn't match anything, not in our records, not in the libraries from the echoed cities. It's like a new story is writing itself. Silas joined her, and watched in silence. Then he whispered, No, it's not writing itself, we're writing it now. The next day a door appeared at the edge of the garden. It was not part of the tower. No one had built it. No one had imagined it. It simply existed. When opened, it revealed a path, not to another world, not to another reality, to a place that had never existed before. A place with no name, no past, only choice. And from across the tower, those who had healed, those who had learned, those who had changed, began walking toward, not to escape, but to continue. Scylla stood beside Dana, both of them watching. She asked, "Are we going too?" He answered, "Not yet, because the story wasn't done. And some stories aren't meant to end, they're meant to hold open the door."